People are rolling in. We're gonna give it a couple minutes. No. So while we're waiting, you can drop into the chat where you're based, and if you have kids, something about them that makes you proud or something that brings you joy about them. For me, I'm based in Alexandria, Virginia. I have a 14-year-old son, and he's a published writer. So following in his footsteps of his mom, which makes me really proud. And then I have a 7-month-old daughter, and she's super ticklish right now, which brings me joy, especially when I'm having a bad day. So those are the things that I love about my kids. So I'll drop the intro questions into the chat, and then everyone can answer, including the panelists. People are rolling in on time, so we'll get started in a couple minutes. Oh, wait. Let me see. To everyone. Lucky Charm, that's funny. Leslie says having grown-up conversations with her son brings joy as he's getting to be grown, almost 11. Well, my son is 14, waiting till that happens. It's like a moody teenager. Enjoy 11.
Yeah, sure.
Also in NYC, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. Soccer in the living room. I hope they don't break anything.
Good luck with that.
Right. Kate in DC, 2 twin 6-year-olds. Commitment to communities. I like that. I want to hear more about that. That's cool. Early St. Patty's Day. So we got Brooklyn, DC. I'm in Alexandria. Nice.
Christina, my daughter has a book coming out next month, a book of poems.
Oh, really?
She's 15, and it's called 30 Times Again. Yeah, she's actually the illustrator as well. So
that's super cool. Where can we get it on Amazon?
Oh yeah, I'll make sure I forward a link. So yeah, this is a product of COVID. During the school times, yeah.
That's nice. I was trying to get my son to do a book of short stories, but he's kind of on and off with it. So I want to encourage him to do that. That's really cool. Let me see. While everybody is introducing themselves, we also have 2 polls. Leslie can drop the links to the polls in the chat. So basically, you'll just tell us what benefit your employer offers and what has stopped you from advocating for benefits at work. And these questions will help our panelists address your needs more directly. So the child care benefit options, on-site care, backup care, child care subsidies and or stipends, flexible work schedules and or remote work options, caregiving support groups, networks, paid leave, flexible spending accounts, child care center discounts. We're gonna do one at a time so everybody can do the child care benefits first. I didn't even realize that an employer can offer so many benefits, so that's promising. See. It looks like paid leave is in the lead. And flexible work schedules. Let's see. Yeah, flexible spending accounts is tied with flexible work schedules right now. No one offers childcare subsidies and or stipends apparently, or caregiving support groups and networks. Cool. We'll leave this up for like one more minute and then we'll go on to the next question. Don't forget to introduce yourself in the chat. Something you love about your kids, something that brings you joy about them, where you're based. Good to know, Kate. Let's see. Okay, I think we can move to the second question, the second poll, which is what has stopped you from advocating for care work?
Sorry, I'm just capturing the poll results real quick, and then I'll put the other one in there. I wanted to capture that real quick.
Oh yeah, take your time.
And then can everybody see that? Just to make sure. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that and I'll do the second one real quick. Also, I think that some of y'all, the panelists, you have to toggle to share your chat with everyone instead of with just the panelists. Sorry.
Yeah, I had to do that too. Dancing toddlers and
the audience
NYC.
can see your chat too.
Hi, Soraya. Thanks for coming. Roadblocks to change. So what has stopped you from advocating for childcare benefits at work? I'm not sure where to start. I'm worried that I'll be penalized for speaking up. I don't know what solutions to recommend. I don't consider myself an advocate, or if there is anything else, you can choose other or not sure. Hi, Casey. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Abigail. A lot of New York here. Mom of a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old girls. Nice. It looks like most people are worried that they might be penalized for speaking up at work. That's interesting.
Should we go ahead and get started, and then we can leave this running for a little bit and come back to it?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you everyone for sharing space and time with us today. I'm Christina Sturdivant-Sani. I'm your moderator for the panel. I'm a freelance journalist based in the DC area. I have a 14-year-old son named Monty and a 7-month-old daughter named Oniyoza. So this panel is especially beneficial for me because as a freelancer, I don't have childcare benefits from an employer. So Leslie's app Carefully, which she'll talk more about later, is super useful for folks like myself. Also, I'm in the process of interviewing for full-time reporter jobs that vaguely mentions flexibility for parents, but nothing specific to childcare. So hopefully we can all walk away with some tools and resources from Kate and Leah to help us advocate for what we need at work, whether that's financially or from an environmental or cultural standpoint at work. I'm also excited to have Sheila on the panel today, who can speak to why and how universities should offer assistance and resources for caretakers, because many of you are not only employees, but students who are continuing your education. So if you haven't already, you can take a couple of seconds to answer the poll and then introduce yourself in the chat, and I'll just go over a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Keep your eye on the chat because Lisa from Carefully will be dropping some links to resources and stats that you might find useful. We're going to leave time at the end for questions, so you can put those in the Q&A section. And lastly, because I'm the type of person who likes to know what's next, I'll give you a quick rundown. The first set of questions will help us get the lay of the land and kind of dissect the care crisis in the US right now. Then we'll talk about solutions, and then we'll wrap it up with some tips for advocacy. So whether you're an executive making decisions for your company or an employee in need of benefits, hopefully you get something out of it. So here we go. We can just go to the first question. The first question is for Kate Zogby. She's the head of coach training and development at Keep Company and also the senior vice president of grassroots and government at the Chamber of Mothers. So Kate and my daughter, you might hear in the background, my husband is watching her. So Kate, as an introduction, can you give us just 1 to 2 sentences about Keep Company and Chamber of Mothers, and then talk about the state of childcare in the context of COVID? So how did things change from pre-pandemic to during the height of pandemic and where we are now? And you have to unmute yourself.
Perfect. Well, now I've made my only mistake of this webinar and I'll be good to go for the rest. Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction. Keep Company is an employee-sponsored benefit. We're a group coaching platform that builds personal and organizational capacity through coaching, curriculum, and community. We are offered exclusively to employers to help them care for and keep their people who identify as parents and caregivers. I also do work to support individual and systemic change on the nonprofit side at Chamber of Mothers, like you said, really through coalition building, grassroots movements, working to simultaneously change law, policy, and our broader culture, creating a really overdue societal shift in that we need to acknowledge that mothers and families' rights are vital and valuable in this country. So again, all the work I do really is to support individual and systemic change simultaneously. I don't think you can have one without the other. And really, to answer the question about pre versus this quote unquote post pandemic, is that the way we're comparing a lot of situations now is similar. The pandemic exacerbated existing problems, right? Experts have been sounding alarms about childcare since much before the pandemic began. And prior to COVID, we did not have an adequate supply of high quality childcare spaces that parents could access. It's particularly true, of course, for marginalized and otherwise othered communities. And the pandemic acted kind of like an equalizer, whereas before the crisis existed really only to people who had lived experience of trying to navigate it, or those experts who study it. So it became inescapable because so many more people were having trouble accessing, and that came with media attention. Plus, there were ripple effects like Great Recession / the She Session, which also received a lot of media attention. So it brought light to what experts had been saying for a really long time. We also know parents have been saying this for a really long time. We can talk about quickly how the government tried to support over the last couple of years and how employers are as well, or we can come back to that. You tell me.
We can talk about it now.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, the government supported childcare programs, and there were problems, of course, but they were supporting those programs with like roughly $54 billion in funding through a couple of different ways. 2 big law packages and funding packages, and then also a budget bill. There were also some general funds that child care centers could access, including like the Paycheck Protection Program. But it really is worth noting that less than 1% of PPP funds went to child care programs. All of them are considered to some degree small businesses, except for the big ones, right? That program has lots to criticize, which I am certainly not the expert in, so that's all I'll say about it. But given that 55%, that less than 1% of those funds went to child care centers, and they were all struggling to pay their bills and keep their doors open, combined with the fact that 55% of parents say that they would take a pay cut to work for a company that offers quality childcare, and 60% of working parents agree that offering a childcare benefit would keep them at their current job. Employers really have stepped up over the last couple of years, recognizing just how difficult it was for families with people in their home who needed care to also have paid work responsibilities. So they have done lots of different things: increased access to childcare in their communities, increased like the amount or type of childcare benefits that they were already offering, like then offering backup care or tutoring, and expanding what types of employees or employee statuses qualify for benefits. When you think about low wage workers in a big company that also has home office and a C-suite, et cetera, like now those programs are being offered to employees at every level. And then also employers have thought about funding or subsidizing an employee's preferred care arrangement, including flexible spending accounts and other types of subsidization, is that a word? And they've also thought about adding on-site childcare for those big companies who really do have the space, particularly as they're not using their offices in the same way as they were. And so like lots and lots and lots of ways people have, but 2 to 3 years later, most parents say they still don't really have access to the support that they need. Only half of working parents say that their employer has added new policies or benefits, but and 90% of them say it's more important than ever for companies to provide that access to reliable childcare, because 2/3 of them say that right now their employees are not getting it.
Thank you, Kate. And my next
Sure.
question is for Leah Krashchik. She's the Vice President of Economic Mobility at the NYC Economic Development Corporation, where she has the Child Care Innovation Lab. So Leah, can you give us a brief intro to the lab and then describe the root of the childcare crisis? And I know you're in New York, so it's fine if it comes from that perspective, since some of the causes will likely apply to other places across the country.
Absolutely. So just to tell you a little bit about the lab, what we do is really think about how do we build a more vibrant and inclusive economy by making New York City the center of future of care and home to a thriving childcare innovation sector. And basically the root of that is that we believe that you can't have a conversation about the future of work, which we have constantly, right, without talking about the future of care, because they're two sides of the same coin when it comes to the future of talent. And we also believe that childcare is a sector that's ripe for innovation in its own right. And until we address childcare as such, we're not going to see the type of solutions that we need in this space. So what we do is twofold. Since 2019, we've led much of the existing research on childcare as an economic issue and as economic infrastructure for New York City. And we've really quantified what are the costs of lack of access to care and its effects on families, businesses, and the economy at large. And once the pandemic hit, of course, it became very clear the extent to which childcare is core to our economy. And like many people on this call, I think we've all experienced what the realities are of lack of access to childcare firsthand. And coverage of the issue also increased. So we hear more about the she-cession, the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, but what we don't hear enough about are the solutions to these problems. So what we focus on primarily is catalyzing both public sector and private sector innovations that are paving a more accessible and equitable future of care. So to your question of what is the root of the childcare crisis, right? So I think we need to talk about two crises here. One is formal licensed care, right? Daycares, and one is what happens after daycare is no longer available. So when we look at the licensed childcare crisis, we often talk about childcare as 4 distinct crises. We talk about a lack of affordability. We talk about a lack of supply. We talk about a lack of wages, right? Terrible wages, and inconsistent quality. But when you take a step back, actually the root of the entire formal childcare crisis is insufficient profit margins for providers. So what's happening is families are spending an exorbitant amount of their income on childcare, right? And it's very unaffordable to them. Here in New York City, over 80% of families can't afford home-based care, right? Formal daycares that are run out of someone's home. And over 93% of families can't afford center-based care. We talk about affordability, we're taking the federal definition of spending no more than 7% on your income of care, right? So it's very unaffordable. People pay an exorbitant amount for care, but that's actually not enough to cover the costs of providing care. So what's essentially happening is that a childcare provider has 0 or very low profit margins. Because they have no profit margins, right? There is very little supply. So for example, a bank is very unlikely to lend you money to start a childcare center, or you have almost no money to do repairs on a roof that might be leaking, right? And so we don't have enough supply in that space. So in New York City, for example, 78% of kids 0 to 2 do not have a childcare seat in the city. There's not enough seats for them. Almost 60% of all of our neighborhoods are childcare deserts, which are basically at least 3 kids competing per slot. And a lot of our neighborhoods are like 10 kids per slot, right? And if you look at people who work non-traditional hours, specifically between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is about 1.6 million New Yorkers, right? There are under 5% of all daycares that are open those hours. So supply is a big problem. And again, that's due to lack of profit margins. Now, again, because providers have no or very few profit margins, they're also unable to pay workers. So childcare worker wages are bottom 5 of all types of occupations that you can hold. In New York City, it's depending on how you cut it, part-time or full-time, you're talking about potentially being at the very bottom of the rung. And so that's also comes from that very crisis. And finally, because there's not enough supply and people aren't able to vote with their feet and leave a daycare they don't like, and because quality of the wages are so low and daycare workers are very likely to leave those positions and have turnover, those two lead you to inconsistent quality, right? Because experts are leaving and you just don't have an option to go somewhere else. You have a huge waiting list of a year plus. So the only way we're going to solve the crisis is addressing the profit margin issue. And at the end of the day, what that means is increasing payment to the system. Now, a lot of what we talk about in the public sector is subsidizing low wage families to be able to access care, which is incredibly important, but it's also insufficient because while that allows you to slice the pie more equitably, it's not growing the pie. And we need to do both in order to solve the childcare crisis. So that's the licensed care crisis. And anything we do that doesn't address the profit margin issue, for example, bring more quality standards, increase supply, all of that will lead back to the crisis if we're not increasing payment. Then there's the informal childcare crisis, which is what happens, right, between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. Like I said, a huge amount of New York City workers work those hours. And so the idea that our conversation is focused on, pushing for a universal childcare system that will look like K-12, right? We need to think about the day after policy passes. If we have a system that looks like K-12, that does not allow, it's not a system that's meant for women to work. It's 6 hours of care a day, right? So we need to think more comprehensively about what are the innovative solutions that happen after that formal daycare is no longer an option.
That was so comprehensive. I really appreciate that. And speaking of non-traditional hours, that leads us right into Leslie, the founder and CEO of Carefully. Can you just give us a brief intro to yourself? You'll talk more about Carefully later, but just if you want to give a brief intro and then talk about who is being left out of the traditional, standard childcare benefits, and also care more broadly, because we like to think about care for infants and preschool children, but there's also older children who may get sick, and then spouses, and then the elderly and others. So can you just run down those 2 things for us, Leslie?
Sure. So I'm Leslie. I'm the founder of Carefully. Carefully is a platform for parents to connect with people they trust. So we provide an affordable, accessible, inclusive option to employers and institutions so they can extend childcare benefits to families and caregivers who are most often excluded, underserved, and left to fend for themselves with when struggling with childcare needs. So exactly what Leah is referring to. This typically includes the shift workers, essential workers, students, teachers, immigrants, gig workers, just to name a few. So everything that we've been talking about, that's really where Carefully is like trying to fill this gap with community-based care in a sort of in this idea of the sharing economy. So talking kind of about who's getting care, who's getting the benefits. Well, first let's talk about, there's a lot of people when we start to talk about childcare benefits that kind of tune out because they don't have kids, right? They even start to feel maybe indignant because we're talking about people getting benefits that they're never going to benefit from. And so if we just simply broaden our perspective from childcare to talk about care more broadly, we realize that we're actually talking about 75% of all employees. Some of them don't even identify themselves as caregivers because they're just doing it without even thinking about it. And as you kind of referred to, you might be talking about taking care of your elderly parents, your disabled siblings, your sick spouse, your neighbor who doesn't have anybody else to take care of them, or even your pet. These are all caregiving responsibilities, and you might be doing multiple, might have multiple caregiving responsibilities, and that falls on the healthy income earning individuals in a family unit. And so then the conversation starts to become more inclusive, right? And as you sort of broaden that perspective, you realize that you're actually talking about 53 million Americans who are taking care of loved ones. They're providing $470 billion in unpaid care, and it's costing the economy $264 billion in lost work every year. And within that population, there's actually still 66% of them that are caring for one or more kids. So childcare, even for them, is still a huge concern. And of those people, multiple surveys tell us that 1 in 3 caregivers plan to leave the workforce in the next 2 years. So the bottom line is that employers need to find a way to support these workers if they care about absenteeism, productivity, and turnover. And this is something that, you know, we know that they care about. And so this is sort of when the conversation, this is how you move that conversation to being exclusive to inclusive. And if we think about who's being left out, well, in 2022, the Department of Labor actually reported that 6% of part-time workers and 12% of full-time workers in private industry had access to employer provided childcare benefits. So the question is probably who's getting childcare benefits. And that's really who you would assume is. It's people that are higher paid, salaried, more senior. Those are the people that are getting them. The people that are left out are going to be the people that don't qualify for them or that can't take advantage of them. So part-time workers, shift workers, people that are working non-standard hours. And those are the people that need them the most. And also, I think those are the people that that are the most difficult to hire for right now. Those are the people that have the highest turnover. And I think that also right now, they're also the most critical for our economic recovery. And so it starts to be a really important conversation for the economy, for everybody at the company that wants to survive, that's dealing with the layoffs that we're dealing with right now, and for the employer that wants to hire and wants to retain talent. And then just one other point, which we touched on a bit, which is that we talk a lot about new and expecting moms. We've got, focused a lot on paid leave, which is really important. We've, I think, started to realize that elder care is important, which is great. But I think there's still this gap in the middle, with parents of teens who are often overlooked as caregivers. You mentioned that you have a 14-year-old, so you might have experienced this, but there are often a lot of really complex challenges around, mental health. And there was a recent study that came out about the sort of increase in the sadness and violence in teen girls. I know that when I read that, I was really taken, not surprised, but still taken aback by that. And so having support from work for this group of parents is even more critical. One of the things I think that came up in the poll was sort of that a lot of workplaces don't offer support networks. So this is something that Carefully offers, but it's also one of the things that one of the benefits that employers underestimate the most when it comes to value for the employees, and one of the things that employees actually see as most important to supporting them. So I think that that's a really important context as we move forward in the conversation, just all of these different elements of the conversation that often get missed when we just talk about child care, and people think about, that's just paid leave, or that's just new and expecting moms, so I don't have to listen.
Thank you. Those are some really big numbers. 53 million Americans taking care of loved ones unpaid. That's crazy. And I've never even thought of people who are taking care of their pets, because I'm not an animal person, but yeah, most of my neighbors have pets, so that makes a lot of sense too. Talking about marginalized people, Sheila Caldwell, the Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Southern Illinois University System, is here. Can you briefly tell us about your role there? And then tell us how childcare affects adult students, faculty, and parents from marginalized communities. Also, I love the way Kate summed it up in the chat that care happens at any age. That really summed it up really nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. A little bit about Southern Illinois University. We serve 66 regions in the state of Illinois. We serve about 23,000 students, including undergraduate, graduate students, medical, law, pharmacy, and dental. So we have a very comprehensive programs to study. And my role actually is to really create equity. And I like to define how we talk about equity, and that's to act right, make right, and do right by all students. So when they come to us, we're not just accepting them, but that we're also putting in structures and making sure our systems and policies are equitable so they can thrive and complete college in a successful way. And that's why I think this conversation is so important, because right now we have about 4 million adults who are also trying to, and that's throughout the United States, like 1 out of every 5 college students have are actually parents. And so if we can't solve the childcare crisis in higher ed, then we can't effectively do our jobs, because our jobs are to make sure that students complete college in a timely fashion at an affordable price. And when we talk about childcare, we've talked about the numbers. So another statistic that I think worth sharing today is that when we specifically talk about students and marginalized communities in 35 states, in addition to the District of Columbia, if you have 2 children who are in childcare, you will pay more for childcare than you will mortgage. In 28 states, you will actually pay more for tuition. I want us to think about, we talk a lot about the high price of college tuition. We don't talk about the high price of childcare as a comparison to tuition, but in 28 states, you will pay more money for childcare than you will to send your kid to college, right? We save for college, we don't save for childcare, right? And so that's another thing to think about. Another thing that I also would like to point out is that because we have so many parents who are in college and they find it difficult to be able to afford the price of college, it's also difficult for them to really provide sustainable childcare. And one of the things we find is that college students with preschool age children only have about 10 hours to dedicate it to schoolwork, sleeping, eating, and leisurely activities, 10 hours compared to 21 hours, twice as many for students that do not have children. So again, it's a time issue. Another thing that I think is ironic about that is that parents are more likely to drop out of college, but we have known for years, and the data still shows today, that they have higher GPAs than students who don't have children. So our most successful and effective performing students are the ones who are dropping out of their parents because they do not have affordable and sustainable daycare. And it not only affects students and also families from marginalized communities, we also have studies showing that faculty who have young children are actually very disappointed when they talk about their highest dissatisfaction. They specifically talk about childcare in their communities. And again, we've heard so many resources, and the founder, Leslie, just spoke about it, how they are saying that they actually are going to leave the workforce. So when you talk about 2 to 3 years, it affects all sectors, including higher ed. And the last thing I want to point out, as we talk about offering childcare, is that we can't forget the benefits that goes to children. I work in the education environment. The first 5 years of childcare is very important as far as their development. You know, they've done studies like children who are not exposed to education. It's not just childcare. These children are being taught things while they are away from their parents. So if we can't find quality and affordable and sustainable daycare, that is a ripple effect. They're not learning the information. Those 5 years of development, early education, that is lost. They've done studies in the New York Times that those children suffer from 1 million words less in their vocabulary than students who are coming from more affluent households who are actually getting the education. And we also know, when we talk about educating moms, and I'm going to specifically say that because when you educate a mom, you educate a society. So if we cannot help women, mothers, get through the pipeline, it definitely has this universal effect in our communities because now they can't go out and get the education they need and have the money, the sustainable wages to support their family, and then also not getting the education to impart to their kids. Another data point that people may not know is that oftentimes children do not look just to the community or the family. The mom is actually the highest predictor of how far your kid will go in the education pipeline. So again, we understand our role in higher education is really trying to make sure that we have another structure, and childcare is actually the most important factor that we can focus on as far as promoting student success in higher education. And so I just want to say that, but I also want to give a cautionary tale, because even though today we are inviting more and more parents into our college pipeline, throughout the nation, we have decreased child care centers on our campus. 20 years ago, it was about 55% in four-year schools. Now it's 49%. And the same holds true for community colleges, that we have more on-site daycare centers. And I know that was a part of your poll, but now today we have less than we did, but we're serving more of those type of students, adult students with parents. And so again, the trend is going in the reverse direction even prior to COVID. So that's something that we really need to focus on, because all of our mission in higher ed is not just to say come to college, but it's to provide resources so they can graduate. And again, if we don't solve this crisis, we will not be effective in our mission in any parts of the nation.
Thank you, Sheila. We want to know if we can get a t-shirt made that says, when you educate a mom, you educate society. So just like, you might want to get that made up.
Okay. Can I copyright that? That's
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah.
Also, you made me think about my niece, because during the pandemic, I think she was around like 4 or 5 years old, and my brother had her stay with his wife's cousin, I think, who was an educator, and she just learned so much during the pandemic when she wasn't in school. So by the time she started school, she was like a whole full grade ahead, just because she was like really intent on teaching her things, not just, you know, playing games with her and things like that, but actually like teaching her how to spell and, you know, speak and all those things. So yeah, I think all of those points are really great. And now we're going to get into solutions, because we don't want to, you know, want this whole thing to be too down. So Leslie, circling back to Carefully, now you can get into how it works and, you know, why you started it and what are the benefits.
Sure. So, so Carefully is definitely my passion project. Started out of my own pain and my own challenges. I started it as a single mom. I think I mentioned my son's 11 now, but I started it actually when he was 4, and I was a single mom. I didn't have a lot of friends with kids. The way that I describe my origin story most succinctly is I say I'm an introverted mom with an extroverted kid. He always needs a play date and I always need a break. That's the best way I can describe it. And so I went to work on Carefully. When the pandemic hit, I really realized that the problem was so much bigger than me, and there was an opportunity to support others with Carefully in a much more impactful way. I think that we typically only ask for help when we're desperate, but I really invite people to imagine a world where we're comfortable giving and receiving support from our network for all types of asks, big and small. In a world, in this world where our kids can be more carefree, where they can run out of the house to the neighbors, into our house. And this is this village that people are talking about, that they're looking for, that they're seeking out. And it really starts with asking for help when you need it and giving help when you can. To get there, in America, at least, we have to give up our obsession with this American ideal of individualism. Because we really are all connected. That's what will ultimately trigger a domino effect of connectivity and community that can impact our future generations. And I think that's the change that at least I seek. I see it in the world. I think we're at a tipping point where we're ready for that change. I see the impact that at least within my community, that it's had on my son, and I don't want to go back. Carefully helps you build that community by allowing you to invite people into your trusted network who are interested in this idea of sharing and supporting each other through the spirit of mutualism. So you might have a small network today. You're like 2 or 3 best friends that you ask for help when you're desperate, or that you have play dates with. but this is really about expanding your network to make it more reliable and resilient so that you can include people that are second, third, fourth degree connections that you see at the park, that you know from school, and that you can start to build trust and support through care. And as the saying goes, this is about solidarity, not charity. And it really takes one person, you, to spark this movement in your community. So really, this is like my own personal experience. As I said, I'm an introvert, but I know that people are waiting for it to start. When, like, after the pandemic, like when we were all going back to school, my son stayed home for most of the pandemic. And when he was going back to school, everybody, you know, I set up a play group with 4 other families, and I was so scared to go ask them for help. But as soon as I like went up to them in the park, like this look, I still remember it today, the look of like relief on their faces, because nobody knew what they were going to do in that during that after school care gap. And I was like, we'll set up a play group and we'll each take care of the kids one day a week, and like we can work the rest of the days. And like, oh my God, yes. And now like I have this great community that, you know, we rely on each other now, and we see each other when we're walking or we need things, and the kids run around together now that they're older. So I see how it works, and I believe in it, and I invite everybody to really give it a try.
Thank you. And again, there's a link to the app in the chat. And I really admire, Leslie, how, you know, you started it when he was 4 years old and he's 11 now, and you could have just like dropped it, you know, because you probably needed it more when he was younger, but you're still like creating and building it out for other people. So I really admire that. So Kate, Leah, and Sheila, if you can share 1 to 2 success stories, either from your organization or from other companies, as far as providing resources and benefits and things like that to workers or to students. And then you can also include things that haven't worked and then lessons learned from those situations. So we can go with Kate, and then Leah and Sheila.
Great, thanks. So at Keep Company, we work primarily with professional services organizations, law firms, management consulting, financial services. And in those organizations, they all have really high billable hours, exceptionally high attrition costs because of the like always on demand culture of that work. And what we also know about care is that is an always on demand culture of work as well, right? So there are very high attrition, like I said, but what that means is because care work is primarily done by women and people of color, there are immense gender and diversity leadership gaps in those industries, because those are the people who leave first. Not only, and broadly across this country, care is the second reason that people leave the workforce, second only to retirement. So it is significant that we are supporting employees who have paid work and care work responsibilities. We're seeing an expansion of those benefits, honestly, including ourselves. Organizations know now more than ever they can't afford to lose their people, given the economic place we find ourselves in, right? The cost is too high to replace employees. And so what we do is support employees in understanding what their unique needs are to integrate care work and paid work into who they are as people, right? It's really a 3-legged stool, and the work we do at Keep Company, like I said, helps them recognize those strategies and those solutions that are unique to them, because no one has the exact same care work responsibilities, no one has the exact same support networks, and no one has the exact same work dynamics. And so solutions really are going to be individualized, which is why a community of support is something that's so integral and successful. What we do is support people in making the ask. To Leslie's point, I loved it. I'm pretty sure I like raised my hands, because we know is that people don't ask for the individual types of support that they need. They assume they will not get it because we are messaged that we will not get what we need at points of life, frankly, and that is a deeply internalized message, and it stops us from making asks of employers who are motivated to keep us feeling supported at work. And so the success stories all come back to that. Someone coming back to the next meeting, we do a 12-week intensive program. And so we see them over the course of those 12 weeks, someone coming back to a subsequent meeting and saying, I asked my boss to work from home on Wednesdays instead of Thursdays because of my kid's appointment, and they said yes. All of those ways that people are feeling lifted up in the validity of their need and the value of who they are in the company, is why I do all the work that I do. And I think that more employers offering community support and those individualized arrangements is the future of work.
Thank you. Leah, you have any success stories?
Yes, I love talking about positives in this space. So first I want to talk about like the potential of the market, right? When we talk about how much money is already being spent on care, we're seeing that every year in the US, we're spending $650 billion on care, right? That is significantly more than the pharmaceutical market, but we don't think about disrupting things for the better in this market, at least until now. Of the 650 billion, about 260 billion are spent on childcare, right? Just to give those numbers. But what's really great is that we are starting to finally see movement towards like real innovation and investment in the space. And, you know, just to bring it to life, I mean, obviously we're huge fans of what Leslie is doing with Carefully. For example, we talk to doctors in different communities to see, you know, how are your parents doing? They're a great node of like interaction with parents. And we have had doctors in certain neighborhoods that are heavily immigrant neighborhoods who tell us that when their parents that they're seeing, they have kids, they then send them to their countries of origin for 5 years, for example, so that a grandparent can take care of the child, right? But a solution like Carefully, for example, could start to build a community for people who don't have that community built in, who haven't been, you know, in the city for many generations, and starts to build that support network and mutual aid that's so necessary, right? So that's one example of the type of innovation you're seeing there. We're seeing how are we keeping wealth in the family and paying for labor, right? So in addition to providing maybe a specific daycare or network of daycares that an employer pays for, what if the employer gave, you know, there's a company called Vivi, and they give X amount of points. Every point is worth X amount of dollars, and you can pay whoever you want with that money, right? So you could pay a parent to take care of your child. You can pay a neighbor, someone that you trust. And instead of, you know, taking that money and giving it to an external party, you're leaving the wealth in the family. We often don't talk about the cost of grandparents, but a lot of grandparents are leaving the workforce before they retire. So how are we paying them for, you know, labor? Similarly, we have entrepreneurs like company Mirza, who's thinking about how are we navigating financial planning and financial instruments, right? Sheila was talking about how care is often more expensive than a mortgage or college, but for every one of those large expenses, we have tons of financial instruments. We don't have anything for childcare. Even though parents are at the beginning of their career, they're only going to make more money over time. So there are really innovative financial instruments that we could be thinking about, like a reverse 529 or a tuition assistance equivalent, that are non-predatory financial instruments for families to actually be able to afford care. And then there's things like household management tasks, right? So like the Hello Freshes and Blue Aprons of the world are probably the first disruptors there. And finally, we have people who are innovating in terms of saying, you know, we had people from Nordic governments come to us and ask us how to keep women in the workforce, because even though they have 10 hours of care a day, and they actually will pay for like half of like your Hello Fresh type of like buys that relate to family and care, they can't get women back to work. And the reason that is because, you know, they say, I've had a child, I want to spend time with my child, right? I don't want to be away from them for 10 hours a day. And so there's a lot of also innovators thinking about co-work and co-care spaces right now, right? And how do we fundamentally change work so that's working for more people, and especially for working parents with young kids who might want to breastfeed their children and still be able to work. So that's one thing that's really exciting, is just to see the movement in the space. And the second thing that's really exciting is also really innovative things happening in the public sector. So a lot of what we do is that we do a landscape analysis of the incredible like legislation and pilots that are happening across the nation in places like Wisconsin and Kentucky, right, which help to incentivize employers to pay for care. And one of the really great innovations we saw was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the state, families, and employers split the cost of care. It's called a tri-share model. And we're really excited because New York State have taken up this model themselves and are now piloting that. So we are seeing movement in the space of how public-private partnerships can be incentivized.
The company you mentioned earlier, you said Vivi? Is that VIVVY?
VIVVI.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. And Sheila, any success stories you want to mention?
Yeah, I actually would like to hold up SIU because on both of our campuses, we have several campuses, specifically Edwardsville and Carbondale. They both operate on-site daycare centers. And so that is something, so we're a part of that group that have, you know, sustained our services because we recognize how important it is. But I just want to say we actually have actively engaged with Carefully because we see them as a solution. In fact, just even last week, had an opportunity to have Leslie come and present to several stakeholders in all different departments throughout the college. And the feedback I received afterwards was like, we absolutely need to do this because although we offer on-site daycare, we talked about childcare deserts. We know that 40% of students cannot get access to childcare, especially if they're in marginalized communities. So this is a resource that is going to help us with childcare, but also strengthen just our network and our connections with each other. So we see a lot of benefits, even mentioned to what Leah said, like when you have communities from migrant populations and other parts where they want people who understand their culture. We've actually had those conversations. We want individuals to take care of our children, the LGBTQIA community. Some parents might say, well, we have a different mindset about childcare. They want to make sure that their kids are safe. And so the way the app and the information is designed, we can really customize. And so again, that is another resource that's going to strengthen us. We see that as a success story. And then another thing that I also want to mention that I think is successful that a lot of individuals may not know about is that really since 2016, the federal government, Congress has tripled their investment in the Child Care Access Mean Parents in School program. It started out as $15 million, now it's up to $55 million. And not that that's sufficient, but they've actually tripled the money to subsidize childcare for adult students or just students who are parents. So that is something that if you are an employee as well as a college student, that you should make sure that you're taking advantage of, even if there is not on-site childcare. This funding is available and is given to colleges. So I would highly encourage people to really inquire about that particular resource. So again, Carefully and on-site daycares, we see that as the way to problem solve and to make sure that we're offering access to resources that will help our students have quality childcare and also enable them to go to college, have less stress about that, and be able to complete and enter into the workforce and whatever their other goals are successfully.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you for telling us about that benefit. Amy wanted to know, are there any innovations at the federal or state level that push for the balance between, you know, the cost of childcare and living wages for the caregivers? So if anybody else had any, you know, federal or state level innovations they wanted to mention before we move on to how people can advocate for themselves.
You know, that's a great point. One of the things that we know that colleges also teach, they teach early childhood education, but I think it goes back again to what Kate and Leah was saying, based on the fact that they typically have not offered a living wage, and they look at the return on investment because college costs are so high. So you want to encourage students to go into programs of study that's going to help them obviously be financially sustainable. Many colleges have closed the program. So I just want to be very clear about that. They are closing early childhood education programs. And again, when we talk about students benefiting, you want someone who's educated to watch your kid in your absence. But if those programs are no longer existing because they're not paying living wages, that's one thing to think about. So I did just want to share that, not go back to non-solutions, but I think that's important, that's a data point that the research is actually showing as well. I think the only benefit is that because so many states now have increased minimum wage, whereas those employees were usually getting like $7 or $8, now they might be getting closer to $13 to $15 in most states, and that's getting closer to a living wage. But again, you don't necessarily need a college degree to get those wages. And so what does it look like to say, go and get a college degree to make the same amount of some money as somebody without, and not that that's the only benefit of college is making more money. But again, when people think about investing money, they want to see some type of profit. So I just wanted to mention the wages are higher, but again, they could be higher. I'll put it that way, because they deserve it. Yeah, because they're educating the next generation.
Right, exactly. Thank you. And now moving on to like tips and advocacy. Leslie, can you just describe the levels of advocacy, whether that's like getting involved at work or in your community or city or, you know, nationally? Like, how does that work? And are there any organizations that you admire in the advocacy space?
Sure, and I'll kind of go quickly, so we have just a few minutes for questions. I don't want to go too deep in this. I think we've covered a lot of great ground, but I mean, I think that we're talking about care at work, and for me personally too, I left my job in corporate America when I started working on Carefully, and that was the right choice for me. But working in the corporate world, I think like that's where you learn a lot of advocacy skills. And so this advocating for something you're passionate about, like care, is a great place to start. I know that I think I'll share the results from our poll as we talk about this. I know that there can be a lot of trepidation around stepping into the space where you're driving change, and people look at you and it's maybe having difficult conversations. But you can also find safe spaces there. Joining ERGs is a great place to build coalitions and to start conversations that can be positive and supportive and supported by your company. And then that's where you can kind of get your feet wet and realize that there's actually positive ways to drive change within an organization, and it's not as scary as you might think, although it could be. I can't tell you for sure. I left that world for that reason, so I'm not gonna create a false perception of it. But at the same point, I think that the right company is going to embrace those changes, and having somebody driving them forward is the right place to start it. And then I also, especially in New York, so I have gotten involved with the CCC, the Citizens Committee for Children. It's a great advocacy organization in New York, and they have also a great course called the Community Leadership Course, where people that are interested in children and childcare advocacy can take this course and get a great foundation in all the issues that are facing children in New York City, learn the data, the topics, meet the advocates, meet people in it. And so I would really encourage people that are in the city to get involved with that organization. They have been amazing for me to learn as I get more involved in the advocacy space too. And then obviously Chamber of Mothers is also another great organization as you move into sort of the federal level. And also, I mean, there's things that you can do that are really light touch that have a huge impact by just signing up for organizations and supporting their campaigns. I used to think that it was sort of a little bit of a waste of time, I'll be honest. But as I got involved with the CCC, I realized like all these organizations need your support with their social campaigns and their email campaigns. And there's so many things if you're interested in, in immigrants and, special needs, disabilities, different things that are near and dear to your heart. There's so many organizations for everything, and you can get involved at different levels. Whether it's donating money, donating time, signing their campaigns and sending letters to your representatives, all of those things are necessary. So I think there's lots you can do at the different levels. Sorry, I talked longer than I wanted to.
No problem. We can do like a lightning round of tips. So maybe like each panelist, Kate, Sheila, and Liat can give 30 seconds on what people can do to advocate for themselves. And if anybody has any last minute questions, you can throw those in the chat. And thank you, Leah, for expanding to answer Amy's question in the chat. So just like 30 seconds on tips for people to advocate for themselves.
Okay, I'm gonna just say it's community. We discussed like problems becoming apparent en masse is what made the childcare crisis a reality for our entire country. And so too is advocacy more impactful when we are en masse. Your voice is louder, your message is stronger, and the movement is more resilient and sustainable when we can share the work. So like find a cause that you are committed to, find people who feel similarly to you, and check out Chamber of Mothers, because we are doing a lot to support not only our pillar issues, but certainly the intersectional issues that touch moms all over this country and their families.
I'll add that on the employer end, right? Like you're advocating to an employer. Let's talk about the problem with employers is not that they're not willing to pay for care. It's not that simple, right? They are lacking the tools to have a return on investment calculation. How much is this actually going to return in the form of talent retention, attraction, et cetera? B, you can't be what you can't see. There aren't enough concrete solutions being offered to employers, so they know exactly what are their 5 options in terms of increasing their ability to play in this game. So for example, I saw that Carmi is here from Onsite Kids, right? She's offering a modular construction of daycare solution for employers. So someone who's like in a, wants to offer a centers but can't afford it can start to think of innovative ways to do it. And the third thing is someone needs to do the work for the employer. Even an employer who's willing to do it and has the solutions needs an executor of the solutions. They're willing to press the 3 buttons to pay for it perhaps, but like that infrastructure needs to be built. So we have to build the supply and the demand together in order to have any movement in the space. And we'll be sharing both the childcare employer toolkit with concrete solutions. And I can also share a deck that includes some of the innovators in the space that are disrupting the way that employers can think about offering these type of benefits in a very easy way.
Sorry, Leah, can you read your answer quickly? Because you sent it just to the host and panelists, and I don't know why the copy's not working, or I would copy and paste it.
Oh, I see. So to Amy, just to answer your question. So basically the situation right now is that we're pitting affordability against wages, right? So it goes back to what I was talking about with that the root of the childcare crisis is there's a lack of profit margins. So even though people pay a lot of money, that's not enough to manage the cost of care, and therefore wages are very low. And so the only way to change the system is to increase payment to the system, right? And that's A, increasing public dollars into childcare, 2, having more employers pay for childcare, and 3 is financial instruments for families. And anything short of increasing payment to the system is just never going to solve the crisis that you're dealing with.
Thanks for catching that, Leslie. And we'll wrap it up with Sheila.
Yes, I'm thinking again about barriers to college completion. So we talk about flexible options. A lot of colleges, especially post-pandemic, offer online programs and classes. So I just wanted to say that's one of the ways that students can advocate and just to make sure. But the other thing I want to say is that it's been so many data points and resources shared, and most companies, they understand numbers, they understand ROI, and they also understand not having a quality workforce and the cost of losing people. It costs more to actually recruit someone than to retain a current employer. So we have given, I feel like, a lot of information. I've learned a lot where you could use the data to submit a proposal or to make a compelling argument. I mean, you might not be able to necessarily argue on behalf of your entire organization, but I do think you could talk about your value to the organization and maybe submit a proposal to do flexible work options or even to get more payment for childcare. And I think now with so many people leaving the workforce, McKinney, they do a report about the status of women and just where they are. So again, just different resources to construct a compelling argument about why employers should invest. And I think that would be an effective strategy.
Thank you so much. We're going to end right there. And I believe we'll send out a recording of this conversation to everyone who registered. And we can also send out all the toolkits and links and resources as well. So thank you all for participating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks for
Bye.
participating. Thanks.
Should we hang back, Leslie, or where?
Yeah, we can stay on for a second. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
There's still some people. I'll just remove. My mom's hanging around.
Like Judy Burrell in the house. Yes.
So although it's 6 of us, I see 7. So it's just one.
Let me end the